Hi, I'm Ash and this is Two Thin Coats. Today we're going to be looking at basing the minis that we unboxed in the last video from the Indomitors box. So I'm going to be going through how I made the bases for these models. The principle's the same for all, it's just slightly different designs. As you can see here, this one's got lots of slabs and one slightly raised. This one's only got a few. I'll probably put a few tufts on it once it's been painted. And then this third one, I've tried to make it look more like smaller slabs or block paving. So, first things first, you'll be using one of the smaller bases to show you what we need to do. And you just get your sandpaper and give it a little buff. We want to rub it until a lot of the texture's gone, but we want to leave some of the grain still showing. Just makes it slightly smoother than the standard base. Doesn't take long to get that texture gone, and as you can see, it's still got a little bit of the grain, but it's a lot smoother. Right, now for making the tiles, I used 1mm styrene. I was able to get this from Hobbycraft, and I think it was about £1.20. It's quite flexible, it's really easy to cut. Just lining it up with the centimetre lines on my mat, and I'm doing a 2cm wide strip. Get your hobby knife and give it a slice. Don't need to cut all the way through. Once it's scored, because it's so thin, it does just snap and it's a nice clean cut. Then we want to do it at least the width of the base. Now I think that's a 28mm base, so I'd do it about 35mm so it'll stick out either end, and then we trim it off after it's all glued onto the base. And again, just slice it and snap it. Right, then I'll grab the ruler and the knife, and again using the markings on my mat, I'm going to do 1cm cuts, not going very deep, just sort of scoring lines in, and I'll do 4 of those across the width. As I say, I'm only sort of scoring it. You could use a pencil, but actually scoring the lines on will help slightly later on. So once that's cut along the width, you're then going to do a line down the centre. This cut, I cut the first to the first line, and then I missed the next one and then cut to the next one. And as you can see here, you get that sort of tiled slab effect. And then the next stage is to make those small cuts a little bit deeper. Now I do this by angling my knife, and using that score, I just carve out a V, and I go either side of the score line to the score line along each of the marks that we've scored, and just carving a V into each. Takes a little bit of practice, but if you get it wrong, chances are you'll probably just cut all the way through, and that's not a problem. It just means that the tiles will be separated when you go to glue them on the base. Or you can leave that one tile off if you cut all the way through, and it'll look like that tile's come up or been broken, so it can add to the effect. Once you've finished cutting all of the grooves, you get a nice clean tile look. But I didn't really want a clean tile look, so I start chipping away at the edges. Start off slicing along each of the outer edges just to give it the same beveled appearance. Work along all four, keeping the blade at the same sort of angle as I did in the previous one. Then, using the blade at a steeper angle than before, I start taking more out along the inner grooves, and that just gives it a bit of variety and makes it so it's not a smooth, flat slab. It looks like it's an old stone. When starting to do the damage and the chipping, you can either do a little or a lot, and it's quite good to vary it from base to base. Do one slightly more damage than another, or even one tile to the next, because one might have had a shell go off and it's cracked a couple of the slabs, and it's sitting right next to a clean, pristine slab. That's not a problem. Here I'm just taking a big chunk out of the far end tile before I start carving out some cracks and some large chunks taken off the corners of the slabs. I wanted that end one to almost sit like it was misplaced, like the slab was slightly lower than the slabs around it, so I took quite a bit off. It looked like it was sticking out the ground, a bit more ajar than the rest. If any of the other parts seem a little bit rough, just run the back edge of your blade along the edge, and that'll just take any swarf off. And there we have all the grooves. Next is to add some cracks. So the same as we did with the straight lines, but doing this freehand, just drawing a crack, and then from there I cut a thin groove through it, the same as we did before, and then that gives you a nice crack through of the tile. Then just doing another one on the larger tile, just repeating that same process, and there we have it, 2 cracks going through the tiles. And next it's taking some chunks out of the corners. It gives a better effect if you do this on inner tiles or slabs. It makes it look like they're damaged. Here's a close-up of the same thing, literally just whichever ones you want to break off, 2 small cuts, and it comes straight out. And just a couple can really add to the effect. Now, I wanted the texture of the slabs to be on 2 levels, so I'm just using my knife to mark where those slabs come to on the base. Just scoring a line, it hasn't got to be deep, just so you can see where it comes to. And then repeat the exact same process that we did on the styrene sheet. I decided to do smaller slabs on the base, give it a bit of variety. Then it's on to gluing. Because we've used styrene sheet, it means that the normal plastic cement that we'd use on the models works just as good on here. So a few dabs of that across the base, and then position the slabs that we've previously made on top. And then we'll just leave that for a couple of minutes to set.
2 very boring minutes later.
Now it's time to take your trusty snips and snip along the edge using the side of the base as a guide. It hasn't got to be super neat. We'll neaten it up with a knife and a little bit of sandpaper after, and we'll save that little offcut for another base. It's always useful to have little bits that you can use for debris, and although I try and save this last piece, it fires off into the stratosphere, gone forever. And then take my hobby knife and just even that out, get it a little bit closer to the base, and some of the sharper corners, just smooth that off. And just a quick once over with the sandpaper, smooths it all out. And there we have it. All done. Now, it's on to painting. As always, using a cheap Halford's plastic primer. I would have used black, but I'd only got white left. So sprayed it white, and then got the paints out that we need. For the base coat, I'm using Baden Black and Rhinox Hide. I'm going to be doing some grey and some brown slabs. We've got Baneblade Brown and Administratum Grey, and finally a white scar just for all the highlights. Also got Norton Oil and Agrax Earthshade for a wash in the recesses. So we're going to start off with the Abaddon Black. I'm going to do this all over, shaking the paints to make sure it's nice and mixed. And as always, we're going to be adding plenty of water and just apply, you guessed it, 2 thin coats. The first coat that we're applying is very thin, almost the consistency of a wash, and it just makes sure that in all the recesses it's nice and dark. Don't forget, go around the rim of the base. Then we're using our trusty hairdryer to speed up the process, and then back in for the second coat. Then it's on to Rhinox Hide, and we'll just pick out a couple of the slabs, 1 or 2 of the smaller ones, and maybe 1 of the larger ones as well. Again, thin it down and apply 2 thin coats. Just avoid getting any of the paint in the recesses. You can touch it back up later, and we will be doing a black wash, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem if any does go in. There we have it. Some black and some brown. Then we're going to do a bit of pre-shading. We're going to take the Abaddon Black and the Administratum Grey and mix those together. It's about a 50-50 mix. It's quite a dark grey. Then we're just picking out some of the areas in the middle of the slabs and almost stippling it on. It hasn't got to be nice, neat lines, but we want something that looks natural. Don't worry at first, it's going to look very spotty, but it will all tie in when we dry brush over the whole thing later. Then we add same amount of the Administratum Grey again, making it slightly lighter. Now we go back over all those parts that we did before and stipple slightly less, but over the darker grey that we've already applied. Just in the centre of all those parts. And then after that's done, we go in with the Administratum Grey again. and this time it's just neat administratum grey, and we're just picking out tiny little centre line for each of those veins that we've sort of put through it. Hasn't got to be thin, you can do some thin, some thicker. It just adds some variety and makes it a lot more natural looking. Don't worry if you think it looks a bit too stark at the minute, it will all tie in together. Now we're going to do the same with the lighter brown, bit of light brown in with the rhinox hide, and just mix that in a 50-50 and highlight the centre of all the brown slabs. And then again, just add in a little bit more of the lighter tone, picking out the centre lines and just stippling that on the brown areas. Right, once we've cleaned our brush thoroughly, it's then onto the dry brushing. So we take an old large brush, lighter tone, I'm going to do the administratum grey for this part. Put a dollop onto your palette and then work it in between the bristles, really getting a lot of paint onto your dry brush. You want to get plenty of paint in between the bristles, and then rub it on your kitchen roll, just very, very lightly, dust across the whole thing. And as you can see, because we're using the same tone that we've used for the highlight in the centre of the slabs, it starts to bring it all together. And once it's been fully dry brushed in the grey, we're then going to move on to doing another dry brush with Baneblade brown, but this time we're only going to be picking out the brown slabs, so still using the same brush. I haven't washed it, so it's still got a bit of the grey in, and just hitting those brown slabs. Doesn't matter if a little bit goes on the grey, adds a bit of variety. And then next it's on to a wash to darken the recesses again, get them back to almost black. For this we're going to be using Nuln oil, so get a fairly decent sized brush, plenty on, and apply that first of all in all the recesses nice and thickly, but eventually all over the top of the slabs as well, just a little bit thinner on the tops. You don't want it to pool too much. Doesn't matter if it pools in the recesses, but you don't want a big pool of it on top of the slab. I've just added a bit of Agrex Earthshade, just a few spots just to let it blend into the Nuln oil, and they'll mix and it'll get a nice brown grey consistency. And that's the wash. Then finally, a final dry brush with the Scar White, using a smaller dry brush this time, and it's a very, very fine dry brush, so you're not trying to cover the whole thing, just pick up on all those crisp edges, bring out all the detail that we've carved in. I would like to just rub the dry brush on my finger to see how much paint it's actually going to apply to the miniature beforehand, and you can normally gauge then whether you need to rub it against the kitchen roll a little bit more, or whether there's not quite enough paint to go on. Just catching all the edges, a little bit on the flat surfaces, but not much. And then with the Baden Black, just going in and cleaning up the base, just where we've hit it with the dry brush. Tidy that all back up so that the edge of the base is nice and black. And then you're done. And one last thing to do now. Epic action shots. And so that's how I will be basing all of the Space Marines out of the Indomitus box. As you can see, I've done each one ever so slightly different, but because I've followed the same steps for each base, when they're all painted, they will look like they're all fighting on the same battlefield. And join us next time where we'll be turning this Space Marine into this in just half an hour. Thanks for watching.